Hey, welcome to our weekly Bible study. We finished the Gospel of Mark, and just one last reminder, you can go back and find all of those lessons in our archives on YouTube. Look for Early Church of Christ, Midweek Bible Study, Gospel of Mark, and you can find that very easily. Today, what I want to share with you is a reminder that here at the Early Church of Christ, we're going through the Bible in a year. Now, not everybody chooses the same plan. Some people choose their own independent plans, little spurts, 5, 10 days at a time, 3 days at a time, whatever. That's not the important part. The important part is that you get into God's Word, and if you can challenge yourself to do that every day, all the better. But the plan that we're using as a church is the Eat This Book Bible plan on the YouVersion Bible app. There will be a link in the description of this video, and it's just one of many reading plans that get you through the entire Bible, which is a lot easier than it sounds, in a year. And so basically it's 3, 4, sometimes just a couple of chapters. Right now they're in the Old Testament. Later on they'll be in the New, plus one psalm or a section of a psalm every day. I don't think 119 goes just in one day. And if you want to join us in that, listen, there is no guilt and no shame in the fact that when I record this, we're on day 46. You just subscribe to that reading plan, jump to day 46, and start right where we are. Don't worry about that at all. We are not legalists about the daily Bible reading plan. Nothing but grace. So if you want to join us, join us. Now, what I'm going to do today is actually pull the reading that is kind of a mix of today's Bible reading and tomorrow's in the book of Numbers. That's where we are. So by the way, if you jump in now, you've already skipped Leviticus, okay? I know some of you, the boils and the pus, it's a little too much for you. That's okay. But if you start today, you'll pick up in Numbers 11, 12, and 13. Now, Numbers is a book that sometimes people get bogged down in because sometimes it sounds like the title is true. It's all just numbers, but not today. Today, we are at a very exciting crossroads in the book of Numbers and in this reading. Way back, Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, God promised Abraham that the land, we call it the promised land, the land of Canaan, would one day belong to Abraham's offspring, to his descendants. And for hundreds of years, Abraham and his descendants passed that promise and passed that hope and passed that story along. That one day they would be a nation, too numerous to even count, like the stars in the sky or the sands on the seashore. That one day they would have their own place, their own land. They would be their own people and their own country. And now it's Numbers 13, and they are standing at the edge of that land. And they looked out at it like I imagine some pioneers and new landowners looked at this land a long time ago with promise and hope and excitement. And that's where we find them in Numbers 13. Now, if you're familiar with the story, you know that it doesn't quite go as planned, but not because of anything God did or didn't do. But that's jumping ahead. We want to focus today on Numbers 13. And in Numbers 13, they are standing at that edge of the promised land, and they decide to send in 12 spies, right? Just like the little vacation Bible school we sang when I was a kid. 12 spies went to spy on Canaan. What's the next line? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Why were 10 bad? And why were 2 good? Well, that has to do with the report they brought back. And the first thing that they come back with is the promise is real. And just think about this. For hundreds of years, this was the story that brought them hope. While they were slaves in Egypt for centuries, Israelites passed this story on from grandfather to son to grandson to daughter to granddaughter, generation after generation, put their hope in the promise of God to Abraham. One day, you won't be these people's slaves. You will be God's Israel. You will be a place of your own and a people of your own in a place of your own. And they looked on that with deep, deep hope. Now the spies go in and they see God keeps his promises. It was as beautiful as they thought it would be. It was as plentiful as they thought it would be. So much so they brought back 2 men carrying a pole, these clusters of grapes that they walked back into the camp with people shouting shouts of praise to God of how wonderful it must be, with reports of how glorious and great the land really is, and children jumping and shouting and singing and excited. It was a truly awesome day. And then the spies give their official report, and they say, it's just like he said. It's just like he said. It's wonderful. There's land everywhere. There's plentiful crops everywhere. And the cities are beautiful, and it's going to be awesome, until those other 10 spoke up. And the other 10 said, well, it's true. God, He's kept his promise. The land is awesome, and he's brought us here, and he delivered us from Egypt, and he has done this, and he's done this, and he's done this. But there's some pretty big guys over there, and their cities, they are beautiful. They're great. And I know that God said he would give them to us, but they have these big walls, and those walls are, they're pretty tall, and they're pretty thick. And, we're just displaced former slaves. What do we have? We don't have tanks and planes and drones. We've got nothing. And these guys, they're like such giants that we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're going to squash us like bugs. Caleb speaks up and says, no, we got to trust God. And he says, we can do this. And I like the way it's worded. In the NIV, it says, we can surely do this. Joshua and Caleb speak up words of faith, words of trusting God, and words of trusting the promise. But they were outvoted 10-2. And the doubters won. As a result, the people of Israel would spend 40 more years in the wilderness. 40 years in the wilderness. I just want to stop and think about this for a second and ask you, what would you feel like you missed after 40 years of knowing that God keeps his promises and knowing that you were right there, but knowing that you didn't seize it? If you could look back on those 40 years, what would you regret? And then let me ask this harder question. I'm just going to go from preaching to meddling for a second. What is in your life right now that God has said, I will help you with this. I will help you overcome this. I will bless you with this. And I'm not talking name it and claim it, preacher, wealth and health stuff. I mean things where God has said, I can help you overcome sin. I can help you overcome guilt. I can help you overcome the challenges of raising your kids, of rebuilding a marriage, of growing in the Spirit, of having a healthier, deeper relationship with him. These are things God has promised us. What in your life right now could you look at and say, well, it had been 40 years, but I've doubted God for 5. I've doubted God for 10. I've doubted God for 20. And what would my life be if I had trusted him 5, 10, 20 years ago instead of chasing my doubts? Now, first, I have to stop right here and say, this is not a guilt trip. I want you to be encouraged with what I'm about to say. I want you to be challenged by what I'm about to say. And I want you to really pray about what I'm about to say. God is not stymied by, put off by, or his work or promises stopped by the fact that you've had times of doubt, or that you're in one right now. That is life. They didn't wander in the desert for 40 years because they had doubts. They wandered in the desert for 40 years because they let their doubts grow into refusal. There's a big difference, okay? Doubts are just what started that conversation off on the wrong foot, okay? But they could have let their faith speak to their doubt. They could have said, you know what, Caleb, you're right. And the doubts would not have been a problem with God. The doubts would not have drawn his frustration like their refusal did. Refusal was the problem. Refusal is what trapped them in that desert for 40 years, not doubts. That's so important for us to know and for us to remember, because everybody at times has doubts. But we don't have to refuse to trust the Lord. But I do want to challenge you to ask yourself and be honest with yourself, what to this point in your life so far, what has doubt cost you? And then ask yourself this question as you're spending time in prayer with God. God, what could I regain and what could I gain? And where would you take me if I decide that in spite of, even in light of my doubts, I decide with God, we surely can do this? What is there to be found still in your life of faith because you said, God, I don't understand it, but I'll follow you? We have examples all over Scripture of people like that. We have Peter when he was challenged by Jesus to throw the nets to the other side of the boat. You know, he's like, but I've been fishing all night. I know, throw them to the other side. And through his faith and doubt, simultaneously, he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And he throws the net. And what happened? Great catch of fish. We would see several other times in Peter's life where he would let doubt start to get the best of him. But why Peter is because Peter never let those doubts come to rule his life. And he always turned it back over to God and said, I don't get it right now, but okay. What could you gain in your life if you say, okay, I don't understand this at all, but I'll do it, Lord? Unfortunately, that's not what these guys did. What they did was say, maybe we'd be better off going back to Egypt. And let me just tell you, going back, that's never the answer. Faith moves forward into the will of God, into the hope of God, into the promise of God. Even with your doubts, even if you still got them, trust Him and keep moving forward. There's no reason ever to go back to old slavery. Satan's going to tempt you with that. Well, been trying for years to overcome this addiction, but man, maybe it would just be easier to give up and go back. Don't let him get you in that. You may think that it's easier just to give up on your kids, on your marriage, on your job. That's doubt. Don't be somebody who refuses hope. Lean in, pray up, and trust the Lord. Eventually, Israel would learn that lesson, and they would enter into the promised land, and it would be all that God promised. It would also be 40 years later than it should have been. And I just want to encourage you, don't give the devil another year. Don't give him another day. Seize the promises of God now, the strength of God now, and trust His guidance now. So God bless you. I'll be praying for you. I ask you to be praying for me because we all need it, don't we? Have a great week.